Why do some people stand perfectly still when chaos erupts around them? Not frozen, not paralyzed, just still, like they've seen worse, like they know something the rest of us don't. Rachel Porter stood that way on a Friday night when four military police officers burst through the doors of the Officers Club at Naval Base Coronado, their handcuffs already drawn, flashlights cutting through the crowd like accusatory fingers. The wail of sirens outside sliced through the evening air, sharp, invasive, final. And every head in that bar turned toward a single woman, standing alone in the center of a tightening circle. Rachel Porter, you're under arrest for impersonating a military officer and stolen valor under federal law. Captain Jake Morrison's voice boomed across the packed room. His face flushed red, not from embarrassment, but from a volatile mixture of alcohol and righteous fury. He pointed at her like she was Exhibit A in a case already decided. This fraud walked in here wearing dog tags, claiming she served with SEALs. She's a fake. 40 officers and their families turned in unison. Phones lifted. Recording lights blinked to life like fireflies at dusk. The Friday evening crowd, which moments ago had been enjoying drinks and conversation after a long week, now pressed forward to witness what promised to be a spectacular fall from grace. Entertainment, justice, validation. Whatever you wanted to call it, they wanted front row seats. But Rachel Porter didn't struggle. She didn't protest. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply stood there with brown eyes steady and unafraid, radiating a stillness that seemed almost inappropriate given the circumstances. Her hair was cut short, practical, framing a face that showed no trace of panic. Jeans and a plain gray t-shirt marked her as civilian, unremarkable. Except for one detail, a thin silver chain around her neck from which hung a small metallic object that caught the overhead lights. MP Commander Captain Linda Vasquez approached with practiced authority, her movements crisp and professional. She'd done this before, arrested people, read them their rights, processed them through the system. But something about this woman made her pause for just a fraction of a second. Something in the way Rachel stood, the way she breathed, the way her eyes tracked movement without seeming to move at all. You have the right to remain silent. I request to contact higher authority, Rachel said, her voice measured and cold as winter steel. Naval Special Warfare Command, Major General Stephen Hayes. Morrison burst into laughter, a harsh sound that several of his companions echoed. You think a general gives a damn about some wannabe like you, lady? You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life. But on the challenge coin dangling from Rachel's necklace, a series of numbers etched into the metal glinted beneath the bar lights. GU 7041201. And in the next 90 minutes, everyone in that room would come to understand they had just committed the gravest error of their careers. How do you know when someone's military? Really military, not the kind who tell stories at bars or wear patches they didn't earn. Some say it's in the posture, the haircut, the way they move. But Master Chief Tom Sullivan, a SEAL instructor with 22 years of service, knew it was something deeper, something you couldn't fake even if you tried. He'd been watching Rachel Porter from his position at the bar long before Morrison's group made their move. Her stance, even while seated, maintained an alignment that spoke of ingrained discipline. When someone passed too close behind her, she tracked their movement with peripheral awareness that went beyond normal caution. And when the bartender had dropped a glass, just a simple accident, nothing threatening, her head had turned toward the sound with a speed that suggested threat assessment rather than simple startle reflex. Sullivan had been about to approach her, to ask, to verify what his instincts were screaming at him, but Morrison's group had moved first. 3 SEAL operators, all in their late 20s to early 30s, fresh from a successful training evolution and riding high on accomplishment and beer. Captain Jake Morrison led the trio, his SEAL trident pin prominent on his khaki uniform. Lieutenant Brad Cortez flanked him on the left, phone already in hand. Petty Officer Dylan Ross completed the triangle, his expression skeptical but eager to follow Morrison's lead. "Excuse me, ma'am," Morrison had said, his tone carrying false politeness that barely masked condescension. "Couldn't help but notice your dog tags. What unit did you serve with?" Rachel had looked up at him with eyes that revealed nothing. "I attended a memorial service. I'm not looking for conversation." "That's not what I asked," Morrison pressed, stepping closer. "Those tags military issue, or did you buy them at a surplus store?" "They're mine." "So you're claiming military service," Cortez chimed in, his phone now raised in recording position. "As what exactly?" "I'm not claiming anything. I attended a service for a fallen operator. That's all you need to know." Ross leaned in, examining her with exaggerated scrutiny. "Funny, you don't look like any operator I've ever seen. What was your rate, your command, your graduating class?" "That information isn't public," Rachel said quietly. Morrison laughed. "That's convenient. Let me guess, your service is classified. Super secret squirrel stuff we're not cleared to know about." The surrounding tables had started paying attention. Conversations died. Phones emerged from pockets. The energy in the room shifted from relaxed to predatory. Someone sensing blood in the water. Someone about to be exposed. "You know what I think," Morrison continued, his voice rising to ensure everyone could hear. "I think you're one of those stolen valor cases. Someone who bought some gear online and wants to pretend they earned it, and you picked the wrong night and the wrong crowd to try that con." Rachel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her hands remained flat on the table, but Sullivan noticed her fingers shift position slightly, as if she were consciously forcing them to stay still rather than form into something else. Something dangerous. "I haven't misrepresented myself to anyone," she said. "Then prove it." Ross pulled out his own phone. "Give us your details. We'll verify them right now. Should take 2 minutes if you're legit." "I'm not authorized to provide operational details without proper clearance verification." Cortez whooped. "Operational details. She's actually committing to the story." He panned his phone camera across the watching crowd. "Everyone hearing this, we got ourselves a live one. Stolen valor in progress at Coronado Officers Club." Morrison grabbed Rachel's shoulder, spinning her to face him directly. The movement was aggressive, deliberately invasive. "You think you can disrespect real operators? Sit here in our house wearing our symbols and expect us to just let it slide?" For just an instant, something flickered behind Rachel's eyes. A calculation. A threat assessment. Sullivan saw it from across the room and instinctively pushed away from the bar, recognizing a response pattern he'd witnessed countless times in actual combat veterans. But Rachel didn't move. She didn't strike. She didn't even pull away. She simply looked at Morrison with an expression so empty of fear that it was somehow more unsettling than aggression would have been. "You should take your hand off me," she said quietly. Morrison squeezed harder. "Or what? You going to call the cops? We are the cops here, lady, and you just confessed to impersonating." His words cut off as the dog tag chain around Rachel's neck snapped under the pressure of his grip. The tags scattered across the floor, metal clinking on polished wood. The challenge coin followed, bouncing once before settling near Morrison's boot. Rachel's hand moved to catch the falling objects with reflexes that blurred. She snagged one dog tag midair, her fingers closing around it with a speed that made several observers blink in surprise. But the coin was already on the ground. Morrison bent to pick it up, his expression triumphant. "Well, well, let's see what kind of souvenir you bought online." He turned it over in his fingers, squinting at the engraving in the dim bar light. And then his expression changed. Just slightly. Just enough for someone watching closely to notice the shift from certainty to confusion. "What is this?" he muttered. Sullivan was already moving through the crowd, a cold feeling settling in his gut. Because he'd seen challenge coins before. Thousands of them. Standard issue, commemorative, unit-specific. But some coins, a very rare few, carried markings that most people would never recognize. Codes that meant something only to those with the right clearances. GU 7041201. Ghost Unit 7. Operation 41201. And if that coin was real, if those numbers meant what Sullivan thought they meant, then everyone in this room had just made a catastrophic mistake. Have you ever seen someone's world collapse in real time? Not physically, not literally, but that moment when certainty crumbles, when everything they believe turns to ash, when they realize too late that they've crossed a line they can never uncross. Captain Jake Morrison's face went through that transformation as he stared at the challenge coin in his palm, his fingers trembling slightly as the implications began to register. Master Chief Sullivan reached them just as Morrison looked up, his expression now pale beneath his earlier flush. "Where did you get this?" His voice had lost its swagger, replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like dread. "I earned it," Rachel said simply. "That's not possible," Morrison's words came out strangled. "This coin, these numbers." "Give it back." Rachel extended her hand, palm up, her tone brooking no argument. But Morrison was already backing away, his phone out, fingers fumbling across the screen. Sullivan could see what he was doing, searching for the unit designation, trying to verify, trying to find proof that this was still a fraud, still a mistake he could recover from. The crowd around them pressed closer, sensing the shift in dynamic, phones still recording but now capturing something entirely different than what they'd expected. Lieutenant Cortez moved beside Morrison, peering at the coin over his shoulder, his face drained of color. "Boss, that's—" "Shut up," Morrison hissed, but his hands were shaking now, because whatever he'd found on his phone, whatever information had loaded on that screen, it wasn't confirming his accusation. It was destroying it. Petty Officer Ross, still oblivious to the change, laughed. "Come on, you can't seriously be falling for—" "I said shut up," Morrison's voice cracked. He looked at Captain Vasquez, the MP commander who stood with her hand still resting on her sidearm, her expression professional but increasingly uncertain. I need to make a call." "You already made one," Rachel said quietly. "You called the MPs, you made the accusation, you created this situation, now you get to see it through." There was no satisfaction in her voice. No triumph, just a weariness that suggested she'd been through this before or something like it and found no pleasure in being proven right. Sullivan stepped forward, his voice carrying command authority that made several junior officers instinctively straighten. "Porter, Rachel Porter." He searched his memory, pulling at threads of classified briefings and restricted access documents he'd seen over his career. The name was familiar, very familiar, and combined with that coin with those numbers. "Master Chief," Rachel acknowledged, meeting his eyes with a directness that confirmed what he was beginning to suspect. "You were at the memorial service," Sullivan said, not a question, a statement, "for Petty Officer Marcus Webb." "I was." "You knew him." Rachel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made the surrounding crowd unconsciously lean in to hear. "We served together, in a unit that officially doesn't exist, on operations that are sealed at levels most people will never have clearance to access. Webb saved my life in Kandahar province. I came to honor that debt." Morrison's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering on the floor. The sound was impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "Jesus Christ," Cortez whispered, "you're Ghost Unit 7. Rachel didn't confirm or deny. She simply stood there, her one remaining dog tag clutched in her hand, the broken chain hanging limp from her neck, and waited. Captain Vasquez cleared her throat, her professional demeanor now visibly cracking. "Ma'am, we received a report of stolen valor. If there's been a misunderstanding—" "There's been no misunderstanding," Rachel interrupted gently. "Captain Morrison made an accusation based on what he saw. He followed protocol. The problem isn't his report. The problem is his assumption that women don't serve in units like mine. That's not, Morrison started, then stopped, because it was exactly what he'd assumed. They all could see it now replayed in their minds. His tone, his questions, his immediate certainty that she was a fraud, not because her story didn't check out, he'd never even attempted to verify it, but because she didn't look the part. Because she was a woman in civilian clothes at a bar, and that didn't fit his mental image of what a special operations veteran looked like. Sullivan picked up the fallen phone, handing it back to Morrison without a word. The younger officer took it with numb fingers, his entire worldview currently being reconstructed in real time. I requested contact with Major General Stephen Hayes, Rachel said, looking at Vasquez. Naval Special Warfare Command. That request still stands. Vasquez nodded, pulling out her radio. I'll place the call immediately, but ma'am, you should know. This is being recorded, all of it. Multiple phones probably already being uploaded to social media. This situation is about to become very public. Rachel's expression didn't change. It already is public. The question is what happens next. What she didn't say, what hung in the air unspoken, was that this moment, this exact scenario, had probably happened to her before. Maybe not arrest, maybe not this dramatic, but the questioning, the disbelief, the assumption that she couldn't be what she claimed because she didn't fit the expected mold. And every time she'd had to prove herself. Every time she'd had to wait for someone with enough clearance to verify her service. Every time she'd had to endure the doubt until official confirmation arrived. Sullivan saw it in her eyes. The resignation, the exhaustion, not from the confrontation itself, but from the constant, grinding repetition of having to justify her existence in spaces that people like Morrison assumed belonged only to men like them. How long has it been since you separated? Sullivan asked quietly. Rachel met his eyes. 14 months. Medical discharge after our last operation went south. 3 of us made it out, 4 didn't. The numbers told a story. Ghost units typically operated with 7-person teams. 7 operators on a mission that officially never happened. 3 survivors, 4 dead, and Rachel standing here, alive but carrying wounds that went deeper than flesh. Webb was one of the 3 who made it out, Sullivan said. It wasn't a question. He made it out physically anyway. The rest. Rachel's voice trailed off, but they all understood. PTSD, survivor's guilt, the invisible injuries that took Marcus Webb 12 years after the mission, finally claiming him when enemy fire couldn't. Morrison found his voice again, though it came out hoarse. We didn't know, we couldn't have known. No, Rachel agreed. You couldn't have. That's the nature of classified service, but you could have asked differently. You could have shown respect first, verified second. Instead, you showed contempt and demanded proof. Her words landed like body blows. Accurate, undeniable. And Morrison, to his credit, didn't try to defend himself. He simply stood there, absorbing the weight of his mistake, understanding that it wasn't just about one woman in one bar on one night. It was about every assumption he'd ever made, every judgment call based on appearance rather than evidence, every time he'd looked at someone and decided they couldn't be what they claimed because they didn't match his preconceptions. Vasquez's radio crackled. Command is attempting to reach General Hayes. He's currently en route from D.C. but should be available within 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Long enough for the videos being recorded to finish uploading. Long enough for this incident to spread across military social media. Long enough for every person in this room to fully comprehend the magnitude of what they'd just witnessed. Rachel looked around the crowded bar, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, some shocked, some ashamed, some still skeptical but beginning to doubt their skepticism. "Can I sit down while we wait?" she asked. "I've been standing for a while." It was such a simple request, so utterly human, and somehow that made the entire situation even more devastating, because she wasn't some superhuman warrior standing above them in judgment. She was just a person, a veteran who'd served in ways most of them never would, who'd lost teammates and carried scars and come to a memorial service to honor a fallen brother, and they'd treated her like a criminal. Sullivan gestured to a nearby table, clearing it with a look that sent its previous occupants scattering. "Please." Rachel sat, her movements careful, and Sullivan noticed the slight hitch in her left side, an old injury, healed but not forgotten. She placed her remaining dog tag on the table, the metal catching the light. Her name was engraved there, her service number, information that could be verified if anyone had bothered to try before making accusations. "Master Chief," she said quietly, "you were watching me before this started, you saw something." Sullivan nodded. "Your bearing, your awareness, the way you track movement. I was about to introduce myself when Morrison's group intervened." "Would you have believed me, without the General's confirmation?" It was a fair question, an important one. Sullivan considered it honestly, examining his own biases, his own assumptions. "I'd like to think so," he said finally. "But I also know that belief and knowledge are different things. You're right that the system requires verification for classified service. The problem isn't verification, it's how we treat people while waiting for that verification." Rachel smiled slightly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "That's a more honest answer than most would give." Morrison was still standing nearby, his friends having quietly melted back into the crowd. He looked like a man at a crossroads, deciding which version of himself to become next, the one who doubled down and found ways to justify his actions, or the one who acknowledged the truth and learned from it. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "A real one, not the kind where I make excuses or explain my thinking. Just, I was wrong, completely, fundamentally wrong, and I'm sorry." Rachel studied him for a long moment. "Apology noted," she said. "Not accepted, not rejected, just acknowledged. Because some mistakes carry consequences that outlast their apologies, and forgiveness isn't something that can be demanded or expected, only offered if and when it's earned." The wait for General Hayes stretched on, each minute feeling longer than the last. The bar's atmosphere had completely transformed. What began as a typical Friday night progressed into mob justice and now settled into something closer to a wake, people processing shared guilt, shared shame, shared recognition that they'd collectively participated in something wrong. Several people approached Rachel during the wait, some to apologize, some to ask questions. She handled each interaction with the same quiet patience, neither seeking vindication nor rejecting those who sought to make amends. But Sullivan noticed she never fully relaxed. Her posture remained alert, her awareness never dimmed. This wasn't over yet, not really. Because General Hayes was coming. And when he arrived, when he confirmed Rachel's service, when he provided the official validation that these people required before offering her basic human respect, that would be its own kind of verdict. Not just on Morrison and his friends, but on all of them. On the entire system that required women like Rachel to endure suspicion and accusation until men with enough authority said they were allowed to be believed. And somewhere in the middle of that crowded bar, with her broken dog tag chain and her challenge coin and her 15-year-old secrets, Rachel Porter waited. Again. Like she'd waited before. Like she'd probably have to wait again. Because that's what operators like her did. They served in shadows, sacrificed in silence, and waited for permission to exist in the spaces their own courage had earned them. But patience has limits, and silence eventually speaks louder than words. When the three-star general walks into a room, you feel it before you see him. It's not about physical presence, though Major General Stephen Hayes carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades commanding respect without demanding it. It's something else, an authority that doesn't need announcement, a gravity that pulls attention like a black hole pulls light. The door to the officers' club opened. Conversation stopped. Hayes stepped inside, still wearing his service uniform from his flight back from D.C., his expression carved from granite. Two officers flanked him, a full colonel and a Navy captain, both carrying briefcases that suggested this wasn't a social visit. Behind them came a JAG officer, which meant someone was about to have a very bad day in legal terms. Hayes's eyes swept the room, cataloging every face, every phone, every person still recording. His gaze found Captain Vasquez first. "Commander, status." Vasquez snapped to attention, her earlier confidence now visibly shaken. "Sir, subject in question is seated at that table. She's been cooperative throughout. No attempt to flee or resist. She requested your contact approximately 35 minutes ago." Subject in question. Hayes's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "Is that how we refer to decorated veterans now, Commander?" "No, sir, I apologize, sir. Ms. Porter has been—" "Operator Porter," Hayes corrected sharply. He moved through the crowd, which parted like water before him, until he reached Rachel's table. She'd stood when he entered, her posture military perfect despite the civilian clothes, and now she rendered a salute that spoke of muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. Hayes returned it with equal precision. "Operator Porter, are you injured?" "No, sir, physically unharmed." "Emotionally?" The question caught several people off guard. Generals weren't supposed to ask about feelings, but Hayes wasn't asking out of therapeutic concern. He was documenting evidence, building a case, and everyone in that room who understood military legal proceedings just felt their stomachs drop. "I'm tired, sir," Rachel said quietly, "but operational." "That's not what I asked." Rachel met his eyes. Whatever unspoken communication passed between them, it carried the weight of shared history, shared loss, shared understanding. Permission to speak freely. "Granted." "I attended a memorial service for Petty Officer Marcus Webb. I came to honor a teammate who saved my life and then spent 12 years fighting demons that eventually won. I sat quietly in the back. I spoke to no one. I wore my tags and my coin because they were his, sir, because he gave them to me before Kandahar. Told me if anything happened to him, I should remember. I came here to remember. And instead, I got accused, assaulted, arrested, and recorded by 40 people who decided I was a criminal before asking a single question about who I actually am." Her voice never rose, never wavered, but the pain underneath those words was palpable. Hayes turned to face the crowd. "I need Captain Jake Morrison, Lieutenant Brad Cortez, and Petty Officer Dylan Ross, front and center, now." The three men approached with the enthusiasm of prisoners walking to execution. Morrison's earlier bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by a pallor that suggested he'd already calculated his career trajectory and found it plummeting. Hayes didn't shout, didn't need to. His voice carried regardless. "Explain to me, gentlemen, the chain of reasoning that led you to physically assault a veteran, break her personal property, and summon military police to arrest her for stolen valor without conducting even the most basic verification of her claims." "Sir, Morrison started, then stopped, because there was no good answer, no explanation that wouldn't damn him further. "Did you ask for her service number?" Hayes continued. "Did you request to see her DD-214? Did you contact any command authority before making accusations that are now being broadcast across social media to hundreds of thousands of viewers?" Silence. "Did you, at any point, consider the possibility that a woman sitting quietly at a memorial service for a SEAL operator might have legitimate reasons for wearing military insignia?" More silence. Hayes picked up Rachel's challenge coin from the table, holding it up for the room to see. "This coin represents Operation Neptune Spear. For those of you without the necessary clearances, I cannot discuss details. What I can tell you is that 7 operators went into denied territory in 2011. 3 came back. Operator Porter was one of those 3. The mission was successful, but the cost was 4 KIA and 3 critically wounded operators who subsequently struggled with PTSD. One of whom, Marcus Webb, we buried last month after losing his battle with demons that no medical intervention could defeat." He placed the coin back on the table with deliberate care. Operator Porter earned this coin through actions that I cannot describe, in a theater that I cannot name, conducting operations that remain classified at levels above top secret. She earned her SEAL qualification through the same grueling process that every man in this room who wears the trident earned his. She completed training that has a 90% attrition rate. She served in combat zones under conditions that broke harder men than most of you will ever be. Hayes paused, letting his words sink in. And tonight, she was arrested at a memorial service for her fallen teammate because 3 SEAL operators decided she couldn't possibly be what she claimed based solely on the fact that she's a woman. Morrison looked like he might be sick. Cortez stared at his shoes. Ross had gone pale enough that Sullivan wondered if he might actually pass out. "Sir," Morrison finally managed. I made a mistake. A serious one. There's no excuse for my actions. I'll accept whatever consequences." "You'll accept whatever consequences command decides." Hayes cut him off. "After a full investigation, formal board review, and legal proceedings. Because this isn't just about you 3. This is about a systemic problem where female service members, particularly those in combat roles, face constant scrutiny and suspicion that their male counterparts never endure." He turned to address the entire room. "How many of you recorded this incident? Show of hands." Slowly, reluctantly, hands rose. 15, 20, 30, nearly everyone present. "How many of you uploaded those recordings to social media?" Most hands stayed up. "Then you all need to understand something. Those videos are evidence. Evidence of assault. Evidence of harassment. Evidence of a hostile environment that violates multiple Navy regulations and federal laws. And every person who participated, who encouraged, who stood by and filmed rather than intervening, you're all complicit." The room felt like a pressure chamber. People's faces reflected dawning horror as they realized the magnitude of their involvement. This wasn't just Morrison's career on the line. This was potentially dozens of personnel facing disciplinary action, investigation, possible court-martial proceedings. Captain Vasquez stepped forward. "Sir, as the MP commander who responded to the call, I take full responsibility for—" "You responded to a report, Commander," Hayes interrupted. "You followed protocol. The problem isn't your response. It's the initial accusation and the mob mentality that encouraged it. However," he fixed her with a look that could cut steel, "you will conduct a full review of your handling of this incident, documenting every decision point, every action taken. Because when this goes to investigation, and it will, everyone's conduct will be examined." He turned back to Rachel. "Operator Porter, you requested my contact. I'm here. What do you need?" Rachel gestured to the broken chain on her neck. "Permission to retrieve my property and depart, sir. I have no desire to press charges or create further incident. I just want to go home." "Denied." Rachel blinked, the first sign of surprise she'd shown all evening. "Sir, you're not leaving until we have documented evidence, photographs, witness statements, and formal statements from all parties involved. This incident is going on record, not because I want to punish these sailors, though consequences will be appropriate, but because if we don't document this, if we let it slide into informal apologies and forgotten lessons, nothing changes. The next female operator who attends a memorial service will face the same suspicion, the same accusations, the same presumption of guilt." He held Rachel's gaze. "I know you want to walk away. I know you hate attention and publicity and making yourself a symbol. But respectfully, operator, you don't get to make that choice right now. Because this isn't just about you anymore. This is about every woman trying to earn her place in special operations. Every female recruit being told she's too weak, too small, too different to belong. Every operator who has to prove herself twice as hard for half the respect." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sir, with respect, I didn't sign up to be a symbol. I signed up to serve." I know, but symbols aren't chosen. They're created by circumstances and necessity. And right now, whether you like it or not, you're what's needed. Around them, the room remained silent, watching, listening, understanding that they were witnessing something larger than a single incident, larger than personal mistakes or consequences. They were watching the collision of old assumptions and new realities, playing out in real time under the unflinching eye of dozens of phone cameras. Sullivan cleared his throat. "General, if I may, Master Chief Tom Sullivan, SEAL instructor, I observed the initial confrontation. I can provide formal testimony supporting Operator Porter's account." Hayes nodded. "Your statement will be included. Thank you, Master Chief." He looked around the room again. Anyone else willing to provide formal testimony should contact Commander Vasquez before departing tonight. This is your opportunity to do the right thing, even if you didn't do it earlier. Slowly, hesitantly, people began stepping forward. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough to show that witnessing injustice and participating in it weren't the same thing, and some people, however belatedly, were willing to acknowledge the difference. Morrison stepped forward. "Sir, I'll provide full testimony. No reservations. No attempts to minimize my actions. I'll state exactly what I did and said, exactly what I assumed, and exactly how wrong I was. If my career ends because of this, I earned that outcome." Hayes studied him for a long moment. "Your career will be decided by a formal board, Captain Morrison, but I'll note your willingness to accept responsibility. That's the first step toward learning from this, though it doesn't erase the harm caused." "Understood, sir." The JAG officer moved forward, opening his briefcase and retrieving a tablet. "General, if we're documenting this formally, I need to begin recording statements now. This facility isn't secure for classified discussion, so all statements regarding Operator Porter's service will need to be carefully phrased to avoid disclosure of protected information." "Agreed. Commander Vasquez, I need this room cleared except for essential personnel. Everyone else, give your contact information to the MPs at the door. You'll be contacted for follow-up interviews." People began filing out, some looking relieved, others still shell-shocked. The videos had already spread beyond their control, already been shared and commented on and dissected by thousands of viewers. By morning, this incident would be national news. By afternoon, it would be international. Rachel Porter's attempt at a quiet memorial had become a viral moment, and there was no putting that genie back in the bottle. Rachel sat back down, exhaustion now visible in the slight slump of her shoulders. Hayes took the seat across from her, his voice dropping to a tone meant only for her ears. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I know this isn't what you wanted." "It never is, sir," she said softly. "But you're right. If not me, then who? If not now, then when?" "Exactly." He paused. "Webb would have been proud. The way you handled this, the restraint, the dignity, that's what he always admired about you." Rachel's eyes glistened slightly, though no tears fell. "He shouldn't have had to die, sir. None of them should have." "No, they shouldn't have. But they did their duty, and they did it honorably. Now we honor them by making sure their sacrifice meant something, by making sure the service accepts and respects the next generation of operators, regardless of gender." "And if I can't handle being a symbol?" Rachel asked. "If the attention, the scrutiny, the constant reliving of this night breaks me the way the mission broke Webb?" Hayes was quiet, acknowledging the real fear underneath her question. "Then we get you help, support, whatever you need. But Rachel, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You've survived things that would destroy most people. You'll survive this too." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this would lead to meaningful change, that her humiliation tonight would prevent future humiliations for others. But she'd been through enough to know that change was slow, painful, and never as complete as you hoped. Still, someone had to try. Someone had to stand up and be counted, even when standing hurt. "All right, sir," Rachel said finally. "Let's make the statement. Let's document everything. Let's do this right. Hayes nodded, respect clear in his expression. That's an order I'm happy to receive, operator. And as the formal proceedings began, as the JAG officer started recording and Commander Vasquez organized the witness queue, Rachel Porter squared her shoulders and prepared to relive the worst moments of her evening for the official record. Not because she wanted to, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Because sometimes, dignity means standing firm when everything in you wants to walk away. Sometimes, courage means letting your pain serve a purpose larger than personal comfort. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought in denied territory against armed enemies. They're fought in officers' clubs against assumptions and biases that run deeper than any entrenchment. And Rachel Porter, Ghost Unit 7, Operation Neptune Spear, was done letting those battles go unfought. What happens after the video goes viral? After the shares and comments and hot takes and think pieces? After the initial outrage fades and people move on to the next scandal, the next controversy, the next moment of performative justice? That's when you learn whether anything actually changes or if it was all just noise. Rachel Porter learned this lesson over the following weeks as her face became synonymous with military sexual harassment, stolen valor controversies, and women in combat debates she'd never asked to represent. The video of her arrest, edited, contextualized, weaponized by various parties with various agendas, racked up millions of views across multiple platforms. Her name trended on social media. News outlets requested interviews. Advocacy groups wanted her as a spokesperson. Politicians referenced her case in floor speeches. She declined everything. Not out of shyness or fear, but because she understood something most people didn't. The moment you become a symbol, you stop being a person. Your complexity gets flattened into whatever narrative serves the storyteller's purpose. Conservative outlets framed her as proof that women shouldn't serve in combat roles because it caused confusion and mistakes. Progressive outlets held her up as evidence of systemic military misogyny. Military reform advocates used her case to push for policy changes. Veterans groups split along ideological lines about whether the attention helped or hurt the community. And Rachel just wanted to honor her fallen teammate in peace. She returned to her civilian life, working as an EMT, attending therapy twice a week for PTSD, living in a small apartment in San Diego that was close enough to the ocean to hear waves at night, but far enough from base to feel separate from her military identity. She'd built this life carefully over 14 months since her medical discharge, constructing something normal and sustainable and blessedly quiet. The viral video threatened all of that. You could speak out, her therapist suggested during their session 3 days after the incident. Take control of the narrative. Tell your story on your terms. Rachel shook her head. My story isn't for public consumption. The mission is still classified. My teammates who died can't defend themselves or correct misunderstandings. And the moment I start talking, I become a permanent spokesperson for issues I never agreed to represent. But people are talking about you anyway. Doesn't that bother you? Of course it bothers me, Rachel said. But what bothers me more is the idea that I owe the public explanations about my service, my trauma, my experience. I don't. I served my country. I did my job. I earned my place. That's enough. Except it wasn't enough for everyone else. Interview requests continued pouring in. Journalists tracked down her address. People recognized her at the grocery store, in the gym, at coffee shops. Some offered support. Others challenged her story despite the general's confirmation. A few threatened her for making real operators look bad or playing the victim card. She had to change her phone number twice. The formal Navy investigation proceeded with bureaucratic thoroughness. Rachel provided her official statement, submitted to medical examination documenting the minor injuries from Morrison's physical contact, and turned over her broken dog tag chain as evidence. She attended 3 separate formal interviews, each time recounting the events with the same measured precision, neither embellishing nor minimizing the harm done. Captain Jake Morrison, Lieutenant Brad Cortez, and Petty Officer Dylan Ross all received non-judicial punishment, official reprimands that would effectively end their careers in special operations even if they remained in the Navy. Morrison accepted his consequences with something resembling grace, issuing a public apology that seemed genuine if insufficient. Cortez deleted his social media accounts and reportedly sought transfer to a non-combat role. Ross fought the charges initially, claiming he'd been following Morrison's lead, but eventually accepted his own responsibility. Commander Vasquez received counseling but no formal punishment, as the investigation determined her response had followed protocol once called to the scene. However, the entire incident prompted a command-wide review of stolen valor procedures and training on implicit bias in military law enforcement. But policy reviews and disciplinary actions didn't change the fundamental reality that Rachel had to live with. She'd been judged, found wanting, and publicly humiliated based solely on her appearance and gender. The official vindication didn't erase that experience. It just added footnotes to it. "How are you sleeping?" her therapist asked during their next session. 4 hours, maybe 5 on good nights. Nightmares. Different ones now. Before it was always Kandahar, the mission going wrong, watching my teammates die. Now it's mixed. Sometimes the mission, sometimes the bar. Sometimes they blend together and I'm being arrested while under fire, which makes no logical sense, but trauma doesn't care about logic. Her therapist nodded with understanding. The bar incident re-traumatized you. It triggered all the same feelings of helplessness, vulnerability, and being targeted that you experienced during combat. Your brain is trying to process two different types of trauma simultaneously. Fantastic, Rachel said dryly. What's the treatment timeline on that? Honestly, years probably. The combat trauma was already complex PTSD. This added another layer, but you're doing the work. You're staying engaged with treatment. That matters. What her therapist didn't say, but Rachel understood, was that some wounds never fully heal. They scar over. They become part of you. You learn to live with them, to accommodate them, to function despite them. But they never completely disappear. General Hayes called her personally 2 weeks after the incident. "How are you holding up?" "Surviving, sir." "That's not the same as thriving." "No, sir, it's not." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "The investigation wrapped up. Official findings support your account completely. Formal report recommends policy changes regarding verification procedures and implicit bias training. It's not everything I'd hoped for, but it's something." "That's good, sir." "Rachel," his tone shifted from professional to personal, "talk to me. Really talk. Not as your former commanding officer, but as someone who gives a damn about your well-being. How are you really doing?" Rachel leaned back in her chair, staring at her apartment's ceiling. "I'm angry, sir. Angrier than I expected to be. Not just at Morrison and his friends, but at the whole system that made this possible. At every person who assumed I was lying because I don't look like their mental image of an operator. At everyone who needed you to confirm my service before offering basic respect. At myself for caring what any of them think." "That's a healthy anger," Hayes said. "It means you're processing, not suppressing." "It doesn't feel healthy. It feels like it's eating me from the inside." "Then use it. Channel it. We're opening an advisory board for integration of women into special operations programs. I want you on it." Rachel laughed bitterly. "Sir, I can barely handle my EMT shifts without having panic attacks. I'm not qualified to advise anyone on anything." "You're more qualified than you realize. You know what worked in your training, what didn't, what barriers are real and what barriers are constructed. Your perspective is invaluable precisely because you've lived through both the success and the aftermath." "And if I say no?" Then I respect your decision and we find someone else. But Rachel, you're not going to heal by hiding. Trauma treatment works best when paired with purpose. Right now, you feel powerless. Advisory board work gives you agency, lets you turn your experience into something constructive. She wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her isolation, her privacy, her carefully constructed civilian life. But he was right about one thing: hiding wasn't healing. And maybe, just maybe, preventing other women from enduring what she'd endured would provide the purpose her therapist kept talking about. Part-time, she said finally. Civilian consultant, no operational involvement, no media appearances, strictly advisory. Agreed, I'll have the paperwork sent over. After hanging up, Rachel sat in her quiet apartment and wondered if she was making the right choice. The Navy had taken so much from her already: years of her life, pieces of her sanity, friends she'd never get back. Did she really want to give it more? But then she thought about Maya Chen, the female Buds candidate she'd met briefly after the viral video broke. Maya had reached out via email, explaining that she was in training, that she was struggling, that seeing Rachel's story had reminded her why she was fighting so hard to earn her trident. "You proved it's possible," Maya had written, "even when everyone doubts you, especially then." Rachel had responded with practical advice. Pace yourself, focus on fundamentals, don't let others' expectations become your burden. But she'd also felt something she hadn't felt in months: useful. Like her experience, her pain, her survival could serve a purpose beyond just getting through each day. Maybe that was enough reason to try. The advisory board position started quietly 3 weeks later. Rachel attended her first meeting via video conference, one of 6 consultants providing input on training program modifications, physical standards, and cultural integration challenges. She spoke minimally, listening more than contributing, still unsure of her place in this new role. But during a discussion about BUDS attrition rates for female candidates, another board member, a retired SEAL captain, suggested that perhaps the standards were simply too difficult for women to meet consistently. Rachel unmuted her microphone. "With respect, sir, the issue isn't the standards, it's the support structures. Male candidates arrive at BUDS with peer networks, mentorship from prior service members, and cultural familiarity with the training environment. Female candidates often arrive isolated, without mentors who share their experience, facing skepticism from instructors and peers alike. The physical standards are challenging for everyone, that's the point. But the psychological and social barriers facing women are additional obstacles that male candidates don't face." The room went quiet. The captain's expression suggested he wanted to argue but couldn't quite find footing for his rebuttal. General Hayes, chairing the meeting, nodded. "Operator Porter makes an excellent point. Let's table the standards discussion and focus instead on mentorship and support infrastructure. Porter, can you draft recommendations based on your experience?" She could, and did, and over the following weeks found herself increasingly involved in the advisory work, not because she sought greater responsibility, but because gaps kept appearing that only someone with her specific experience could fill. How do you evaluate candidates fairly when implicit bias affects assessors? You implement blind evaluation protocols and mixed-gender assessment teams. How do you build peer support when female operators are isolated in predominantly male units? You create formal mentorship programs and connect operators across different commands. How do you address harassment and discrimination without female operators facing retaliation for reporting? You establish independent reporting channels and enforce zero-tolerance policies backed by general officer oversight. The work was exhausting. It forced Rachel to relive her own experiences repeatedly, analyzing what had worked and what had failed. But it was also oddly healing, turning trauma into data, converting pain into policy, transforming personal experience into institutional change. 3 months after the Officers Club incident, Rachel attended her first in-person BUDS class graduation. She stood in the back, watching 12 new SEALs receive their tridents. One of them was Maya Chen. Hayes stood beside her, also watching. "You helped make this possible," he said quietly. "No," Rachel corrected. "They made it possible, I just showed them it could be done." But she felt something unfamiliar as she watched those young operators celebrate pride. Not in herself exactly, but in what they represented. Proof that change, however slow, however painful, was possible. Maya spotted Rachel after the ceremony and approached with the kind of confidence that comes from surviving hell and emerging stronger. "Operator Porter, I wanted to thank you, not just for the advice but for existing, for proving it's possible." Rachel smiled. "You did the hard part, I just existed stubbornly." That's exactly what we need sometimes. Stubborn existence in spaces that don't want us. They talked for a few more minutes, trade craft, training memories, the surreal experience of being among the first women to do something men had been doing for decades. And Rachel felt something shift inside her, a small lightening of the weight she'd been carrying. Maybe she wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe she was building something, not healing exactly, that might take years or never fully happen, but moving forward, finding purpose, turning her pain into something that served others. As the celebration continued around them, Rachel felt her phone vibrate. A text message from an unknown number. "The package has been delivered. 48 hours to respond. Ghost 7. She stared at the message, her blood running cold. Ghost 7. The recall code. The one they had agreed would only be used for genuine emergencies requiring the unit's unique capabilities. Hayes noticed her expression. "What's wrong?" Rachel showed him the phone, his face hardened. "When did this arrive?" "Just now." "Do you know who sent it?" "Only 3 people have that code. One of them just used it." She looked at Hayes. "My watch isn't done, is it?" "Rachel, you're retired. Medical discharge. You don't have to respond." 12 operators, General. That's what the message implies. 12 people in danger who need someone who doesn't officially exist. She met his eyes. "When has need to know ever stopped mattering just because I left active service?" Hayes's expression was troubled. "If you do this, you're walking away from the peace you've built, the therapy progress, the civilian life, the normalcy you fought so hard to achieve." "I know. And if it goes wrong, there's no cavalry coming. Ghost Unit 7 officially doesn't exist. We can't acknowledge you, can't support you, can't extract you if things go bad." "I know that too." "Then why would you even consider it?" Rachel looked back at the celebration, at Maya Chen and the other new operators laughing and taking photos, at the future they represented. Because someone has to. Because 12 people are counting on someone who can do what others can't. Because that's what operators do. We answer when others can't. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "What do you need?" "Access to classified briefing materials. Whatever intel exists on the situation. 24 hours to assess whether it's actually viable or a suicide mission." She paused. "And your word that if I don't come back, someone will tell Catherine Rodriguez and the other families what happened. Not the details, just that it mattered." "You have my word." Hayes pulled out his phone. "I'll have the briefing materials delivered to the safe house within 3 hours. But Rachel, you don't have to do this. You've given enough." "Have I?" Rachel asked quietly. "Because David Rodriguez gave his life to save mine. Webb held on for 12 years before PTSD took him. 4 of our teammates never came home. If I can honor their sacrifice by saving 12 more operators, how is that even a choice?" As the celebration continued around them, Rachel Porter, Ghost Unit 7, Operation Neptune Spear, the woman who'd endured arrest and accusation with silent grace, made her decision. Not because she wanted to return to the shadows, not because she craved the adrenaline or missed the missions, but because some debts can only be repaid in the same currency they were incurred. Sacrifice for sacrifice, service for service, life for life. 3 days later, Rachel Porter disappeared again. Her apartment stood empty. Her EMT supervisor received a resignation email. Her therapist got a brief message thanking her for everything and explaining that new assignments required relocating. Only Hayes knew where she'd gone. Only he knew about the 12 operators trapped behind enemy lines in a location that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Only he knew about the Ghost Protocol activation, the 48-hour planning window, the high-altitude insertion into denied territory. And only he knew that 3 weeks later, 13 people walked across a border into friendly territory. 12 exhausted operators and one woman who'd proved once again that the deadliest warriors are often the ones nobody expects. When Hayes met her at the debrief location, Rachel looked older, harder, carrying new scars both visible and invisible. But she was alive. 12 for 12, she reported. Complete success, 0 casualties. Welcome back, operator, Hayes said quietly. Not back, sir, just not done yet. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. Maybe the watch never really ends. Maybe for people like us, like Ghost Unit 7, there's always one more mission, one more person to save, one more debt to honor. And when it finally breaks you, Hayes asked gently. Rachel smiled tiredly. Then I'll know I gave everything I had, and isn't that what operators do? 6 months later, Rachel Porter appeared at another SEAL graduation ceremony. She stood in the back again, watching new operators earn their trident, wondering which of them would answer the call when their own Ghost Protocol activated, wondering which of them would understand that service isn't about glory or recognition. It's about showing up when needed, doing what others can't, and carrying the weight so others don't have to. The true warriors, she'd learned, aren't the ones who seek the fight. They're the ones who answer when called, who serve in silence, who carry secrets that can never be told and burdens that can never be shared. They're the ghosts in the machine, the operators in the shadows, the ones who exist in classified files and sealed records, their sacrifices known only to a handful of people with the right clearances and need to know. And Rachel Porter, standing in that crowd wearing civilian clothes and carrying memories that would never make it into history books, was proud to be one of them. Because some stories aren't meant to be told, some heroes aren't meant to be recognized, some service happens in shadows so deep that light never penetrates. But it matters. God, it matters. And that, Rachel thought as she watched the new operators celebrate, was enough. That had to be enough. Because for operators like her, for Ghost Unit 7, for all the warriors who served in silence and answered calls that officially never happened, there was no other choice. The watch continued. And somewhere in a secure facility with clearances above the highest classifications, another phone would eventually buzz with another message. Ghost 7, package delivery required. And somewhere someone would answer. Because that's what operators do. Always. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. It stands firm when accusation flies, remains silent when mockery echoes, and proves itself not through words but through presence. Real strength isn't loud. It's the quiet certainty of someone who knows what they've survived, what they've earned, what they carry. It's showing up to honor the fallen even when the living doubt your right to mourn. It's enduring humiliation with grace, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to let your service speak for itself. And when the truth finally emerges, when the noise fades and the facts remain, dignity asks for no apology. It simply continues forward, knowing that those who truly understand need no explanation, and those who don't understand never will. The real warriors, the ones who matter, aren't the ones who demand respect. They're the ones who earn it in silence and accept it without ceremony, because they never served for recognition in the first place. They served because someone had to, because the mission mattered more than pride, because sacrifice means giving everything, even the credit for having given it.